Welcome to WYCD Wicked. That stands for What You Can Do. Oh, we're showing a lot of hamburger meat tonight. Hello, Mrs. Jen's cats. Hello, Pinkerbell. Hello, Auntie Corporatus, sweetheart. Good to see you. Yeah, we're covering the VP debate. It starts in about 3 minutes. I'm looking forward to that. First, let's get proper. I had some business to attend to earlier involving a Jack Russell Terrier and a bath. We had to get a little filthy, but that's okay. That's the price you pay for an adventurous gentleman as your Terry. So we're back in the game. All right. Oh, also, wrap snacks is what I recommend for a VP debate. Wrap snacks. They're delicious. Now, I had 2 bags. I was going to make a joke about how I had 2 little baby wrap snacks. But allow me to make an accidental endorsement here because they're so good. While I was setting up the stream, I ate the entirety of one. Gone. It's gone now. Let's get to the show. My heart attack is going to be well earned. Here's some honky telling us that in 2 minutes, 30 seconds, we're going to have a debate. I think that's me. Oh my God, Pinkerbell's had them? I swear to God, I thought these were a Michigan thing. Wrap snacks. My roommate and I used to get really high and walk to the 7-Eleven for wrap snacks. That's what you should do. That's the correct way to eat wrap snacks. You get high as a Georgia pine and you eat them. They're amazing. They taste like God's acceptance. They taste so good. So good. Oh, Scott, everybody, I swear I thought it was a Michigan thing. I like, Scott Ward says, I like the jalapeno poppers from Dollar General. Oh, well, fair enough. That's also good. Now, this is more what I was expecting. Donald James X. Man, I never had Rap Snacks. Am I missing out? Yes. I'm positive we're going to find out that they're made out of something that is illegal for humans to consume.
But no faux pas, and they're looking for a viral moment. That's what they'll be looking for tonight.
No handshake.
Let's debate about it.
Handshake, and there
Certainly.
you have Governor Walz appears to be taking some notes.
Yeah,
Vance
look,
doing the same
I'm
as our
glad
colleagues.
Kamala
shaking hands
shook.
before the cameras came.
That's right.
Oh, okay.
Well, we have the vice presidential
up.
debate
I'm
coming
glad-
up in a moment. It will be.
Kamala shook Trump's hand as a display of dominance. But no, don't shake JD Vance's hand. That lying. I was going to say see you next Tuesday. Let me be absolutely positive that I'm understood here. That lying cunt does not deserve a handshake and should not receive one. Don't dirty your hands by touching him. Don't let him be mistaken for a gentleman. He isn't. I hope JD gets waxed, says Pinkerbell. Me too. Need a Canadian. Hello to you. Good to see you, my friend. Yeah, find them immediately in regards to Rap Snacks, says Pinkerbell. It's true. They are shockingly good. They are shockingly good. All right, let's hear what CBS has to say.
An only meeting between the two men who hope to become
like the
vice
outfit on the
president
left.
of the United States.
Not a fan of the one
Democratic
on the
Governor
right.
Tim Walz of Minnesota and Republican Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio.
Now, this is likely the final debate of this election cycle, and voting is already underway in 20 states. CBS News polling shows this remains a race either presidential candidate could win. The CBS News vice presidential debate starts now.
Fight for every single vote, and we're going to take this country back.
And we are ready to continue to build the future together.
We're going to turn this whole country red with President Donald J. Trump's leadership.
You know what's at the end of this little journey? Kamala Harris as the next president of the United States.
This is a CBS News special, live from CBS News headquarters in New York. America decides.
We're in the
vice
end game
presidential
now.
debate.
And it's fucking pathetic.
Good evening. I'm Nora O'Donnell, and thank
We're
you
still
for
gonna
joining
win.
us for tonight's CBS News vice presidential debate. We want to welcome our viewers on CBS, on other networks here in the U.S. and around the world. We have a consequential night ahead, and our focus is the issues that matter to you, the voter. Let's introduce the candidates. Minnesota's Democratic Governor Tim Walz and Ohio's Republican Senator J.D. Vance tonight meeting for the first time.
Ooh.
I'm Margaret
Oh, they
Brennan.
did
In order to
handshake.
have a thoughtful and
Disappointing.
civil debate, these are the rules that both campaigns have agreed to. Questions will be directed at one candidate who will have 2 minutes to
I
respond.
wanged the TV
The
on
other
that. Didn't mean
candidate
to
will
do
be
that.
allowed 2 minutes for rebuttal. Then each candidate will get another minute to make further points, with an additional 1 minute each at the discretion of the moderator.
Fentanyl
The
kicking
primary
in.
role of the moderators is to facilitate the debate between the
DJ,
candidates.
I clipped you
enforce the
pounding that
rules,
soda.
and provide the
Fantastic. I
candidates
should've
with the
finished her off.
opportunity to fact-check claims made by each
Excessive
other.
audio. I see my
CBS
evil
News
twin
reserves the
doppelganger is
right to
here.
mute the candidates' microphones to maintain decorum. We have not
Salud,
shared the
says
questions or
Primal
topics
Study.
with the campaigns.
Nostrovia.
The stage is set. Governor, Senator, thank you for joining us. Let's get started. Tonight, our country is facing several unfolding crises. The Middle East is on the brink of war. Americans are suffering from the catastrophic impact of Hurricane Helene. And now a labor strike as 25,000 dock workers from Maine
Your
to
name
Texas
got
are
stolen.
picketing. We're going to begin tonight with the Middle East. Margaret.
Thank you, Nora.
Starting
Earlier
off
today, Iran launched its largest attack yet on Israel, but that attack failed thanks to joint U.S. and Israeli defensive action. President Biden has deployed more than 40,000 U.S. military personnel and assets to that region over the past year to try to prevent a regional war. Iran is weakened, but the U.S. still considers it the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and it has drastically reduced the time it would take to develop a nuclear weapon. It is down now to 1 or 2 weeks' time. Governor Walz, if you were the final voice in the Situation Room, would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. And thank you for those
A
joining at home
preemptive
tonight.
strike? Hell
Let's keep
no.
in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists
Preemptive
massacred
strike.
over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's
Whoa.
ability to be able to defend itself is
Hello,
absolutely
stranger.
fundamental. Getting
Good to see
its
ya.
hostages back, fundamental,
Melanie Cosmic
and
Fox,
ending
my
the
co-host on
humanitarian
Speed Debate.
crisis in
Good to see you,
Gaza.
my friend.
But the expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there. You saw it experienced today, where along with our Israeli partners and our coalition, able to stop the incoming attack. But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter. It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago. A nearly 80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd
Ooh.
sizes is not what we need in this moment.
Yes.
But it's not
This
just
is how I
that.
want him
It's
to hurt.
those that were closest to Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. His chief of staff, John
Yes.
Kelly, said that he was the most flawed human being he'd ever met. And both of his secretaries of defense and his national security advisors said he should be nowhere near the White House. Now, the person closest to them,
Lord.
Donald Trump, said he's unfit for the highest office. That was Senator Vance. What we've seen out of Vice President Harris is we've seen steady leadership. We've seen a calmness that is able to draw on the coalitions to bring them together, understanding that our allies matter. When our allies see Donald Trump turn towards Vladimir Putin,
Ice
turn
cold
towards
words. I love
North Korea, when we start to see that type of fickleness around holding the
What the
coalitions
hell?
together, we
I
will
think you're gonna
stay
get your
committed.
wish.
And as the vice president said today we will protect our forces and our allied forces, and there will be consequences.
He adjusts this video.
Governor,
a
your
little bit
time
more.
is up. Senator Vance, the same question. Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
So, Margaret, I want to answer the question. First of all, thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this vice presidential debate. I want to answer the question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are. I was raised in a working class family. My mother required food assistance for periods of her life. My grandmother required Social Security help to raise me. And she raised me in part because my own mother struggled with addiction for a big chunk of my early life. I went to college on the GI Bill after I enlisted in the Marine Corps and served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president with extraordinary gratitude for this country, for the American dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. I want to try to convince you tonight over the next 90 minutes that if we get better leadership in the White House, if we get Donald Trump back in the White House, the American dream is going to be attainable once again. Now, to answer this particular question, we have to remember
literally
that as much as Governor Walz just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies. And God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well. Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. They needed to recognize that if they got out of line, the United States global leadership would put stability and peace back in the world. Now, you asked about a preemptive strike, Margaret, and I want to answer the question. Look, it is up to Israel what they think they need to do to keep their country safe, and we should support our allies wherever they are.
Choking a kitten, they really have a hard time understanding soft power.
Walz, do you care to respond to any of the allegations?
Well, look, Donald Trump was in office. We'll sometimes hear a revisionist history, but when Donald Trump was in office, it was Donald Trump who we had a coalition of nations that had boxed Iran's nuclear program in, the inability to advance it. Donald Trump pulled that program and put nothing else in its place. So Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon than they were before because of Donald Trump's fickle leadership. And when Iran shot down an American aircraft in international airspace, Donald Trump tweeted, because that's the standard diplomacy of Donald Trump. And when Iranian missiles did fall near U.S. troops and they received traumatic brain injuries, Donald Trump wrote it off as headaches. Look, our allies understand that Donald Trump is fickle.
Facts,
He will go
Tina
to whoever
Mufune.
has the
Yes.
most flattery or where it makes sense to him. Steady leadership like you witnessed today, like you witnessed in April. Both Iranian attacks were repelled. Our coalition is strong, and we need the steady leadership that Kamala Harris is providing.
Senator Vance, the U.S. did have a diplomatic deal with Iran to temporarily pause parts of its nuclear program, and President Trump did exit that deal. He recently said, just 5 days ago, the U.S. must now make a diplomatic deal with Iran because the consequences are impossible. Did he make a mistake? You have 1 minute.
Well, first of all, Margaret, diplomacy is not a dirty word, but I think that's something that
Really
Governor Walz just said is quite
impressive.
extraordinary. You
They're
yourself
asking
just
him
said
real
Iran
questions.
is as close to a
He's
nuclear
running away
weapon
from it, though.
today as they have ever been. And Governor Walz, you blame Donald Trump. Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate, not mine. Donald Trump consistently made the world more secure. Now, we talk about what the sequence of events that led us to where we are right now, and you can't ignore October the 7th, which I appreciate Governor Walz bringing up. But when did Iran and Hamas and their proxies attack Israel? It was during the administration of Kamala Harris. So Governor Walz can criticize Donald Trump's tweets, but effective, smart diplomacy and peace through strength is how you bring stability back to a very broken world. Donald Trump has already done it once before. Ask yourself at home, when was the last time, I'm 40 years old, when was the last time that an American president didn't have a major conflict break out? The only answer is during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. Nora?
Margaret, thank you. Let's turn now to Hurricane Helene. The storm could become one of the deadliest on record. More than 160 people are dead and hundreds more are missing. Scientists say climate change makes these hurricanes larger, stronger, and more deadly because of the historic rainfall. Senator Vance, according to CBS News polling, 7 in 10 Americans and more than 60% of Republicans under the age of 45 favor the U.S. taking steps to try
Holy
and reduce
crap,
climate
reality
change.
is
Senator,
catching
what
up with the
responsibility
Republican Party.
would the Trump administration have to try and reduce
Vance
the
just
impact
voted against
of
funding
climate
for
change?
FEMA.
I'll give you 2 minutes.
So did
Sure. So
basically
first of
every
all,
Republican
let's start with
who's
the
now
hurricane
begging
because
for it.
it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today actually a photograph of 2 grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them because the
hope
roof
you were just
collapsed
predicting
and
what
those
this
innocent people
knucklehead
lost
is
their
gonna
lives.
say.
And I'm sure Governor Walz joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people, our prayers go out to them, and
Oh,
we
that's
want as
what Republicans
robust and
are.
aggressive as a federal
We'll
response
think
as we
about
can
you
get
as you're dying.
to save as many lives as possible,
even
and then of
that's a
course
lie.
afterwards to help the people in those communities rebuild. I mean, these are communities that I love. Some of them I know very personally in Appalachia, all across the Southeast. They need their government to do their job, and I commit that when Donald Trump is president again, the government will put the citizens of this country first when they suffer from a disaster. And Nora, you asked about climate change. I think this is a very important issue. Look, a lot of people are
they gonna
justifiably
acknowledge
worried
it's
about all
real?
these crazy weather patterns. I think it's important for us, first of all, to say Donald Trump and I support clean air, clean water. We want the environment to be cleaner and safer. But one of the things that I've noticed some of our Democratic friends talking a lot about is
Even
a concern
MAGA
about carbon emissions, this idea that
has to
carbon
acknowledge
emissions
climate
drives all
change.
of the climate change.
Wow.
Well, let's just say that's true, just for the sake of argument, so we're not arguing about weird science. Let's just say that's true. Well, if you believe that, what would you want to do? The answer is that you'd want to reshore as much American manufacturing as possible, and you'd want to produce as much energy as possible in the United States of America because we're the cleanest economy in the entire world. What have Kamala Harris's policies actually led to? More energy production in China, more manufacturing overseas, more doing business in some of the dirtiest parts of the entire world. And when I say that, I mean the amount of carbon emissions they're doing per unit of economic output. So if we actually care about getting cleaner air and cleaner water, the
FEMA
best
should
thing
just
to
be
do is to
cutting
double
checks
down and
to folks,
invest
and
in
we should
American
be,
workers and the American people. And
taxing,
unfortunately,
corporations
Kamala
and
Harris has
cause
done
them
exactly
pay
the
for it.
opposite.
Governor Walz, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Well, we got close to an agreement because all those things are happening. Look, first of all, it is a horrific tragedy with this hurricane. And my heart goes out to the folks that are down there in contact with the governors. I serve as co-chair of the Council of Governors. As we work together on these emergency managements, governors know no partisanship. They work together to solve the governors and the emergency responders are on the ground. Those happen on the front end. The federal government comes in, makes sure they're there to that we recover, but we're still in that phase where we need to make sure that they're staying there, staying focused. Now, look, coming back to the climate change issue, there's no doubt this thing roared onto the scene faster and stronger than anything we've seen. Senator Vance has said that there's a climate problem in the past. Donald Trump called it a hoax and then joked that these things would make more beachfront property to be able to invest in. What we've seen out of the Harris administration now, the Biden-Harris administration, is we've seen this investment. We've seen massive investments, the biggest in global history that we've seen in the Inflation Reduction Act, has created jobs all across the country. 2,000 in Jeffersonville, Ohio, taking the EV technology that we invented and making it here. 200,000 jobs across the country. The largest solar manufacturing plant in North America sits in Minnesota. But my farmers know climate change is real. They've seen 500-year droughts, 500-year floods back to back. But what they're doing is adapting, and this has allowed them to tell me, look, I harvest corn, I harvest soybean, and I harvest wind. We are producing more natural gas and more oil at any time than we ever have. We're also producing more clean energy.
Way to pitch this.
So the solution for us is to continue to move forward, that climate change is real. Reducing our impact is absolutely critical, but this is not a false choice. You can do that at the same time you're creating the jobs that we're seeing all across the country. That's exactly what this administration has done. We are seeing us becoming an energy superpower for the future, not just the current. And that's what absolutely makes sense. And then we start thinking about, how do we mitigate
Haven't
these
even opened the hard stuff yet.
Thank you. Senator, I want to give you an opportunity to respond there. The governor mentioned that President Trump has called climate change a hoax. Do you agree?
Well, look, what the president has said is that if the Democrats, in particular Kamala Harris and her leadership, if they really believe that climate change is serious, what they would be doing is more manufacturing and more energy production in the United States of America, and that's not what they're doing. So clearly, Kamala Harris herself doesn't believe her own rhetoric on this. If she did, she would actually agree with Donald Trump's energy policies. Now, something Governor Walz said I think is important to touch upon, because when we talk about clean energy, I think that's a slogan that often the Democrats will use here. I'm talking, of course, about the Democratic leadership. And the real issue is that if you're spending hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of American taxpayer money on solar panels that are made in China, number one, you're going to make the economy dirtier. We should be making more of those solar panels here in the United States of America. Some of them are, Tim, but a lot of them are being made overseas in China, especially the components that go into those solar panels. So if you really want to make the environment cleaner, you've got to invest in more energy production. We haven't built a nuclear facility, I think, one in the past 40 years. Natural gas, we got to invest more in it. Kamala Harris has done the opposite. That's raised energy prices and also meant that we're doing worse by the climate.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, would you like to respond?
Well, look, we're producing more natural gas than we ever have. There's no moratorium on that. We're producing more oil, but the folks know, and like I said again, these are not liberal folks. These are not folks that are Green New Deal folks. These are farmers
than it's ever
that have been drought one year, massive flooding the next year. They understand that it makes sense. Look, our number one export cannot be topsoil from erosion from these massive storms. We saw it in Minnesota this summer. And thinking about how do we respond to that, we're thinking ahead on this. And what Kamala Harris has been able to do in Minnesota, we're starting to weatherproof some of these things. The infrastructure law that was passed allows us to think about mitigation in the future. How do we make sure that we're protecting by burying our power lines? How do we make sure that we're protecting lakefronts and things that we're seeing more and more of? But to call it a hoax and to take the oil company executives to Mar-a-Lago, say, give me money for my campaign, and I'll let you do whatever you want. We can be smarter about that. And an all-above energy policy is exactly what she's doing, creating those jobs right here.
Governor, your time is up. The overwhelming consensus among scientists is that the Earth's climate is warming at an unprecedented rate. Margaret?
Tim
Walz. Thank you, Nora. We're going to turn now to immigration. The crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border consistently ranks as one of the top issues for American voters. Senator Vance, your campaign is pledging to carry out the largest mass deportation plan in American history and to use the U.S. military to do so. Could you be more specific about exactly how this will work? For example, would you deport parents who have entered the U.S. illegally and separate them from any of their children who were born on U.S. soil? You have 2 minutes.
Pete
So first of all,
Buttigieg
Margaret, before we
is
talk about deportations, we have to stop the bleeding. We have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala
Before we
Harris
talk about the
started
thing that
and
people are gonna
said that she wanted to undo all
Let
of Donald
me,
Trump's border policies.
make
94 executive orders
some line.
suspending deportations, decriminalizing illegal aliens, massively increasing the asylum fraud that exists in our system. That has opened the floodgates. And what it's meant is that a lot of fentanyl is coming into our country. I had a mother who struggled with opioid addiction and has gotten clean. I don't want people who are struggling with addiction to be deprived of their second.
I don't give a shit what he has to say. David Martin Graf. Everybody is missing the point. What's important is that the UN recognizes 193 countries. I think all members of the UN can prognosticate that in the near future, warfare will become mostly waged robotically. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about or what they're talking about up there. Although I don't think you're going to get any disagreement. Why war is the worst thing we do? Why would we have the worst job we do? Why would we keep humans doing it? No, let's give it to the robots.
Aliens
Let
to
them
undercut the wages of American workers. A lot of people will go home if they can't
Just
work
more
for less than
sanitary.
minimum wage in our own country. And by the way, that'll be really good for our workers who just want to earn a fair wage for doing a good day's work.
Mrs.
And the
Jen's
final point,
cats.
Margaret, is you
I'm
asked
so
about
tired,
family
not sure I can
separation.
make it through
Right
this.
now,
You and
in
the
this
rest of
country,
America,
Margaret,
no
we have
worry.
320,000 children that the Department of Homeland Security has effectively lost. Some of them have been
Han
sex
Solo, am I the
trafficked.
only
Some
one
of them
muting the couch
hopefully
button?
are at
No.
homes with their families. Some of them have been used as drug trafficking mules. The real family separation policy in this country is unfortunately Kamala Harris's wide open
Fellow
southern
Breezy,
border.
I hope
And I'd
that's
ask my fellow Americans to remember when she came into office, she said she was
Correct.
going to do this. Real leadership would be saying, you know what, I screwed up. We're going to go back to Donald Trump's border policies. I wish that she would do that. It would be good for all of us.
He opened
Governor,
himself up.
Do you care to
Just now.
respond to any of those specific allegations, including that the vice
Trump killed-
president is, quote, letting in
Get 'em,
fentanyl and using kids as drug mules, among other things
Yeah,
regarding
well,
children?
The drug mule is not true, but I will say about this, about
Boom.
the fentanyl, because this is a crisis of this, the opioid
That's all you need
crisis.
to
And
do
the
is-
good news
yeah,
on
he
this
just lied
is the
about
last
that.
12 months saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths in our
That's fraud,
nation's history.
Yes.
30% decrease in Ohio, but there's still more work to do. But let's go back to this on immigration. Kamala Harris was the attorney general of the largest state and a border state in California. She's the only person in this race who prosecuted transnational gangs for human trafficking and drug interventions. But look, we all want to
It
solve
will not
this.
run out, David Martin.
Most of us want to solve this.
But we can talk
And
about
that
in
is the
detail
United
later.
States Congress. That's the Border Patrol agents. That's the Chamber of Commerce. That's most Americans out here. That's why we had the fairest and the toughest bill on immigration that this nation's seen. It was crafted by a conservative senator from Oklahoma, James Lankford. I know him. He's super
Tinkerbell, you
conservative,
and
but
I
he's
are
a
in
man of principle, wants to get it done.
100%.
Democrats and Republicans worked on this piece of legislation. The Border Patrol said, this is what we need in here. These are the experts. And the Chamber of Commerce and the Wall Street Journal said, pass this thing. Kamala Harris helped get there. 1,500 new border
Tinkerbell,
agents.
sometimes I wish hell was
Detection
real.
for
So
drugs.
Purdue Pharma executives
DOJ
could
money
go
to
there.
speed up
I wish hell
these,
was real.
the
So when
adjudications
they
on this,
go
just
there,
what America wants.
I could meet
But
them
as soon as I was getting ready
and
to
whip
pass
their
and actually
asses
tackle this, Donald Trump
just
said
one
no,
more time.
told them to vote against it because it gives him a campaign issue. It gives him to, what would Donald Trump talk about if we actually did some of these things? And they need to be done by the legislature. You can't just do this through the executive branch. So look, we have the options to do this. Donald Trump had 4 years. He had 4 years to do this. And he promised you, America, how easy it would be.
One
I'll
of
build
these
you a
people has
big,
been
beautiful
president.
wall.
One
and
of them
Mexico
has
will pay
not
for it.
been president.
Less than 2%
You
of that
have
wall got
problems
built,
now.
and Mexico didn't
It
pay
is
a
the
dime.
fault of
But
the
here we are
person who
again,
was
9
president.
years after he came down that escalator,
That's
dehumanizing
the pitch to me.
people and telling them what he was going to do. As far as the deportation plan, at one point, Senator Vance said it was so unworkable to be laughable.
JD Vance
So
should
that's
not be
where we're
vice
at.
president.
Pass the
He
bill,
doesn't
she'll sign
understand
it.
that vice
Governor, your
president
time
isn't
is
the same
up.
thing as president.
Senator, the question was, will you separate
even know what
parents
job
from
he's
their
applying to.
children, even if their kids are U.S. citizens? You have 1 minute.
Margaret, my point is that we already have massive child separations thanks to Kamala Harris's open border. And I didn't accuse Kamala Harris of inviting drug mules. I said that she enabled the Mexican drug cartels to operate freely in this
JD Vance is going to tell racist lies. He knows. David Martin Graf, you and I keep disagreeing in ways that are interesting. When I disagree with MAGA folks, frankly, I don't think it's very interesting. I think it's interesting when we try to come to agreement with MAGA. But you and I disagree in a way that is interesting. And I hope that in the near future, when I do another speed debate or something like that, you feel up to coming on camera and talking with me, because I suspect, not unlike Donald James X, these are going to be conversations where I walk away with my opinion changed at least slightly. And that I enjoy deeply. So I am inviting you personally to come on and talk about some of this stuff. Let's get back to the debate.
Look, we fix this issue with a bill that is necessary, but the issue on this is what happens when you don't want to solve it. You demonize it. And we saw this. And Senator Vance, and it surprises me on this, talking about and saying, I will create stories to bring attention to this. That vilified a large number of people who were here legally in the community of Springfield. The Republican governor said, it's not true. Don't do it. There's consequences for this. There's consequences. We could come together. Senator Langford did it. We could come together and solve this if we didn't let Donald Trump continue to make it an issue. And the consequences in Springfield were the governor had to send state law enforcement to escort kindergartners to school. I believe Senator Vance wants to solve this, but by standing with Donald Trump and not working together to find a solution, it becomes a talking point. And when it becomes a talking point like this, we dehumanize and villainize other human beings.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, I'll give you 1 minute, but let me just ask you the question first. The governor has made the point, and I think as a sitting lawmaker, you know that Congress controls the purse strings and any funding.
That prick right there.
So you have said repeatedly that Donald Trump would,
with bombs,
through executive action,
just be absolutely clear,
solve
that
this.
son
Do
of
you
a
disagree that Congress controls the purse strings and would need to support many of the changes that you would actually want to implement? You have 1 minute.
Margaret, first of all, the gross majority of what we need to do at the southern border is just empowering law enforcement to do their job. I've been to the southern border more than our borders are. Kamala Harris has been, and it's actually heartbreaking because the Border Patrol agents, they just want to be empowered to do their job. Of course, additional resources would help, but most of this is about the president and the vice president empowering our law enforcement to say, if you try to come across the border illegally, you've got to stay in Mexico, you've got to go back through proper channels. Now, Governor Walz brought up the community of Springfield, and he's very worried about the things that I've said in Springfield. Look, in Springfield, Ohio, and in communities all across this country, you've got schools that are overwhelmed, you've got hospitals that are overwhelmed, you have got housing that is totally unaffordable because we brought in millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans for scarce homes. The people that I'm most worried about in Springfield, Ohio, are the American citizens who have had their lives destroyed by Kamala Harris's open border. It is a disgrace, Tim. And I actually think, I agree with you. I think you want to solve this problem, but I don't think that Kamala Harris does.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, you have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, well, it is law enforcement that asked for the bill. They helped craft it. They're the ones that supported it. That's because they know we need to do this. Look, this issue of continuing to bring this up, of not dealing with it, of blaming migrants for everything. On housing, we could talk a little bit about Wall Street speculators buying up housing and making them less affordable, but it becomes a blame. Look, this bill also gives the money necessary to adjudicate. I agree. It should not take 7 years for an asylum claim to be done. This bill gets it done in 90 days. Then you start to make a difference in this, and you start to adhere to what we know, American principles. I don't talk about my faith a lot, but Matthew 25:40 talks about to the least amongst us, you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans. They simply want order to it. This bill does it. It's funded. It's supported by the people who do it. And it lets us keep our dignity about how we treat other people.
Thank you, Governor. And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status.
Vote against him.
Temporary protected status.
Well, Margaret, but
Senator, we have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important.
We're going to turn out of the economy. Thank you.
Margaret, the rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check. And since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app,
The
where you can
rules
go
were that
on
there
as an
weren't gonna be
illegal migrant,
fact-checking, and
apply
you
for
fact-checked
asylum
me.
or apply for parole,
That's what he's
and be
complaining
granted
about.
legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That
Thank
is
you,
the
Senator.
facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by
Thank
our
you,
own
Senator, for
leadership.
describing the legal
And
process.
those laws-
We have so much
Harris
to get
opened up
to,
that
Senator.
pathway.
Those
We have
laws
so
have been on
much-
the books since 1990.
Oh,
Thank you,
he
gentlemen.
did.
The
We
CBP
wanna have-
One app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created.
John Amos
Gentlemen,
died.
you-
I'm sorry.
The audience can't hear you because your mics are cut. We have so
Ah!
much we want to get to. Thank you for explaining the legal process. Nora?
Thank you, Margaret. The economy is a top concern for voters. Each of your campaigns has released an economic plan, so let's talk about the specifics. Governor Walz, Vice President Harris unveiled a plan that includes billions in tax credits for manufacturing, housing, and a
all that
renewed child
building
tax
anger
credit.
needed to go
The Wharton
somewhere, and I'm
School
glad
says your proposals
it
will
went
increase
to
the nation's
laughing at JD
deficit
Vance
by
being embarrassed.
$1.2 trillion. How would you pay for that without ballooning the deficit? Governor, I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And Kamala Harris and I do believe in the middle class because that's where we come from. We both grew up in that. We understand. So those of you out there
good.
listening tonight, you're hearing a lot of stuff back and forth, and it's good. It's healthy. That's what this is supposed to happen. You should be listening. How's this going to impact me? The bold forward plan that Kamala Harris put out there is talking about this housing issue. The one thing is there's 3 million new houses proposed under this plan with down payment assistance on the front end to get you in a house. A house is much more than just an asset to be traded somewhere. It's foundational to where you're at. And then making sure that the things you buy every day, whether they be prescription drugs or other things, that there's fairness in that. Look, the
Whether they be
$35 insulin is a
whether
good
they be
thing,
prescription
but it
drugs,
costs $5 to make insulin. They were charging $800 before this law went into effect. As far as the housing goes, I've seen it in Minnesota. 12% more houses in Minneapolis, prices went down on rent 4%. It's working. And then making sure tax cuts go to the middle class. $6,000 child tax credit, we have one in Minnesota, reduces childhood poverty by 1/3. We save money in the long run, and we do the right thing for families. And then getting businesses off the
True
ground.
story.
The law
I
as it
tried to
stands
sneak
right now
into
is
Canada once.
$5,000 tax credit for small business,
I got caught
increasing that to
immediately.
$50,000. Now, this is a philosophical difference between
Not
us.
even by Border
Donald Trump
Patrol.
made a promise,
By
and I'll
other
give you this. He
Canadians.
kept it. He took folks to Mar-a-Lago, said, you're rich as hell, I'm gonna give you a tax cut. He gave the tax cuts that predominantly went to the top class. What happened there was an $8 trillion increase in the national debt, the largest ever. Now he's proposing a 20% consumption or sales tax on everything we bring in. Everyone agrees, including businesses, it would be destabilizing it, it would increase inflation and potentially lead to a recession. Look, this is simple for you. Where are we going? Kamala Harris has said to do the things she wants to do. We'll just ask the wealthiest to pay their fair share. When you do that, our
Boom.
system works best.
That's a
More people are
populist message.
participating in it,
That's
and
what we
folks
need.
have the things that
That's
they
what
need.
we need.
Senator, I want to give you a moment to
Fuck the
respond on that.
rich.
But similarly, the Wharton School
Pay
has
the
done an
poor.
analysis of the Trump plan and says it would increase the nation's deficit by $5.8 trillion. My question is the same for you. How do you pay for all that without ballooning the deficit? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, you're going to hear a lot from Tim Walz this evening, and you just heard it in the answer. A lot of what Kamala Harris proposes to do, and some of it, I'll be honest with you, it even sounds pretty good. Here's what you won't hear, is that Kamala Harris has already done it. Because she's
Sounds
been the
good,
vice
doesn't it?
president for 3.5 years. She had the opportunity to enact all of these great policies. And what she's
vice
actually done instead
president.
is drive the cost of food higher by 25%,
Vice
drive the
president.
cost of housing
Not the
higher by
president.
about 60%, open the American southern border and make middle class life unaffordable for a large number of Americans. If Kamala Harris has such great plans for how to address middle class problems, then she ought to do them now, not when asking
Now.
for a promotion, but in the job the American people gave
The
her
vice
3.5 years ago.
president.
And the fact that she isn't tells you a lot about how much you can trust her actual plans. Now, Donald Trump's economic plan is not just a plan, but it's also a record. A lot of those same economists attack Donald Trump's plans,
Are
and
they
they have
watching this?
PhDs, but they don't have
Or that?
common sense and they don't have wisdom.
watching
Because
this, I can
Donald
only
Trump's economic
apologize.
policies delivered the highest take-home pay in a generation in this
wonderful
country, 1.5% inflation, and to
Don't
boot,
judge her by
peace
her
and
friends.
security all over the world. So when people say that Donald Trump's economic plan doesn't make sense, I say look at the record. He delivered rising take-home pay for for American workers. Now, Tim admirably admits that they want to undo the Trump tax cuts. But if you look at what was so different about Donald Trump's tax cuts, even from previous Republican tax cut plans, is that a lot of those resources went to giving more take-home pay to middle class and working class Americans. It was passed in 2017, and you saw an American economic boom unlike we've seen in a generation in this country. That is a record that I'm proud to run on, and we're going to get back to that common sense wisdom so that you can afford to live the American dream again. I know a lot of you are struggling. I know a lot of you are worried about paying the bills. It's going to stop when Donald Trump brings back common sense to this country.
Governor, do you want to respond to that? What has Kamala Harris done for the middle
Yeah,
class?
well, Kamala Harris's day one was Donald Trump's failure on COVID that led to the collapse of our economy. We were already before COVID in a manufacturing recession, but 10 million people out of work, largest percentage since the Great Depression. 9 million jobs closed on that. That was day one. Whether it was the Infrastructure Act or other things we moved. Now, you made a question about experts, said this. I've made a note of this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted. Look, if you're going to be president, you don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald Trump. And the same thing goes with this. And I ask you out there, teachers, nurses, truck drivers, whatever, how is it fair that you're paying your taxes every year and Donald Trump hasn't paid any federal tax in the last 15 years and the last year as president? That's what's wrong with the system. There's a way around it, and he's bragged about that. We're just asking for fairness in it, and that's all you want.
You have a minute.
Governor, you say trust the experts. But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that.
Nonsense.
They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, that it would somehow make us better off, and they were wrong about it. And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage to say to that bipartisan consensus, we're not doing it anymore. We're bringing American manufacturing back. We're unleashing American energy. We're going to make more of our own stuff. And this isn't just an economic issue. I mean, I've got 3 beautiful little kids at home, 7, 4, and 2, and I love them very much, and I hope they're in bed right now. But look, so many of the drugs, the pharmaceuticals that we put in the bodies of our children are manufactured by nations that hate us. This has to stop, and we're not going to stop it by listening to experts. We're going to stop it by listening to common sense wisdom, which is what Donald Trump governed on.
Senator, your time is up. Governor Walz, can you address that? I mean, voters say they trust Donald Trump on the economy more. Why?
If you're listening tonight and you want billionaires to get tax cuts, you heard what the numbers were. Look, I'm a union guy on this. I'm not a guy who wanted to ship things overseas, but I understand that, look, we produce soybeans and corn. We need to have fair trading partners. That's something that we believe in. I think the thing that most concerns me on this is Donald Trump was the guy who created the largest trade deficit in American history with China. Boom. So the rhetoric is good. Much of what the senator said right there, I'm in agreement with him on this. I watched it happen too. I watched it to my communities, and we talked about that. But we had people undercutting the right to collectively bargain. We had right to work states made it more difficult. We had companies that were willing to ship it over, and we saw people profit. Folks that are venture capital in some cases, putting money into companies that were overseas. We're in agreement that we bring those home. The issue is Donald Trump is talking about it. Kamala Harris has a record, 250,000 more manufacturing jobs just in and out of the IRA.
May I respond to that?
And decided that he was going to mimic her facial expressions as much as possible, her posture as much as possible. Basically, he saw that Harris won, and that's the person he's trying to be like right now. Interesting.
I think you got a tough job here because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you've simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household. I know what it's like to not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching,
everyone's grandmother
get back to
could go into medical debt in order to put food on the table. In J.D. Vance's America, everyone will need to go into medical debt to put food on the table. That's a guarantee.
Ahead, gentlemen, on many topics, but right now I want to talk about personal qualifications. The vice president is often the last voice the president hears before making consequential decisions. We want to ask you about your leadership qualities. Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year.
Just say yeah.
Discrepancy? You have 2
Yeah,
minutes.
well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400, town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the street lights come on, and I'm proud of that
Yeah, I lied.
service.
I thought it was an
I joined the
interesting
National
story.
Guard at 17, worked on family farms, and then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher,
Lightning rod.
passionate about it, a young
Hello.
teacher. My first year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now, look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was at. Look, I will be the first to tell you,
Not
I have
particularly
poured my heart into
interesting.
my community. I've tried to
I
do the
don't
best I can, but I've not been perfect. And I'm a knucklehead at times, but it's always been about that. Those same people elected me to Congress for 12 years. And in Congress, I was one of the most bipartisan people, working on things
Vance
like
is gonna
farm bills that we
clobber
got
him
done,
here.
working on
And
veterans
the only way
benefits.
Vance
And
can
then the
screw it up
people of
is
Minnesota
if he
were
slips
able
and
to
says
elect me to
something
governor
crazy.
twice.
And I will
So
bet
look,
you money
my
from my
commitment
wallet.
has been from the beginning to make sure that I'm there for the people, to make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything.
thought,
Many times
that
I
Vance
will
is
talk
too
a
dumb
lot. I will
not
get
to
caught
do
up in
racism.
the rhetoric. But
Let's
being
watch.
there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID. And I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing. So this is about trying to understand the world. It's about trying to do the best you can for your community. And then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in
Don't
governance.
keep talking. You just had it. Yeah, I misspoke.
Thank you, Governor. Senator Vance,
There you go.
in 2016, you called
You
your
mean
running mate,
older.
Donald Trump,
I lied.
unfit for the
That was an
nation's
interesting
highest
story. Shouldn't have
office,
done
and
that,
you
though.
said
That
he
was wrong.
could be America's
Yeah.
Hitler.
End of story.
I know you've been asked many times, and you've said you regret those comments and explained you then
That'd be
voted for
bad.
Donald Trump in 2020. But the
Yeah,
Washington
you
Post
explain
reported
why you
new
now
messages
support
last
who
week in
you-
which you
you
also
describe
disparaged Trump's
as
economic
America's
record while
Hitler.
he was president, writing to someone in 2020, quote, Trump thoroughly failed to deliver his economic populism. You're now his running mate, and you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his. If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But
When he
most
tries to
importantly,
turn it
Donald
back on
Trump
Walz.
delivered for the American people.
Watch
Rising
him slip
wages,
and be a
rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on.
That's who
And
he is.
yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important to actually explain to the American people where I come down on the issues and what changed. Now, you pointed out the messages from 2020. Margaret, I've been extremely consistent that I think there were a lot of things that we could have done better in the Trump administration the first round if if Congress was doing its job. I strongly believe, and I've been a United States Senator, that Congress is not just a high-class debating society. It's not just a forum for senators and congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum to govern. So there were a lot of things on the border, on tariffs, for example, where I think that we could have done so much more if the Republican Congress and the Democrats in Congress had been a little bit better about how they govern the country. They were so obsessed with impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't actually govern. And I want to talk about this tariff issue in particular, Margaret, because Tim just accused this of being a national sales tax. Look, the one thing, and you're not probably surprised to hear me praising Joe Biden, but the one thing that Joe Biden did is he continued some of the Trump tariffs that protected American manufacturing jobs. And it's the one issue, the most pro-worker part of the Biden administration, it's the one issue where Kamala Harris has run away from Joe Biden's record. Think about this. If you're trying to employ slave laborers in China at $3 a day, you're going to do that and undercut the wages of American workers unless our country stands up for itself and says you're not accessing our markets unless you're paying middle-class Americans a fair wage.
Senator, your time is up. Nora?
Thank you. Now to the issue of reproductive rights.
He didn't turn it
Governor
around
Walz,
on Bank.
after
Fair
Roe
enough.
versus Wade was overturned, you signed a
as
bill
20
into
gentlemen.
law that made Minnesota one of the least restrictive states in the nation when it comes to abortion. Former President Trump said in the last debate that you believe abortion, quote, in the 9th month is absolutely fine.
Jersey, Texas.
Yes or no? Is that what
Why
you
you-
support? I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not
why
what
you
the bill
messing with my
says, but
emotion.
look, this issue is what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion. He brags about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade, 52 years of personal autonomy. And then he tells us, oh, we send it to the states. It's a beautiful thing. Amanda Zaworski would disagree with you on it's a beautiful thing. A young bride in Texas waiting for their child at 18 weeks. She has a complication, a tear in the membrane. She needs to go in. The medical care at that point needs to be decided by the doctor. And that would have been an abortion. But in Texas, that would have put them in legal jeopardy. She went home, got sepsis, nearly dies, and now she may have difficulty having children.
Prison
Or
system.
in
Lightning rod
Kentucky, Hadley Duval, a 12-year-old child
is in
raped and
incarceration.
impregnated by her stepfather. Those are horrific. Now, when God asked about that, Senator Vance said 2 wrongs don't make a right. There is no right in this. So in Minnesota, what we did was restore Roe
Good
versus
point,
Wade.
Tom Trask.
We made sure that we put women in charge of their health care. But look, this is not where, if you don't know Amanda or a Hadley, you soon will. Their Project 2025 is going to have a registry of pregnancies. It's going to
God
make it more
damn.
difficult, if not impossible,
Get
to
'em.
get contraception and limit access, if not eliminate access to infertility treatments. For so many
Yes,
of you out
sir.
there listening, me included, infertility treatments are why I have a child. That's nobody else's business, but those things are being proposed. And the catch-all on this is, well, the states will decide what's right for Texas might not be right for Washington. That's not how this works. This is basic human right. We have seen maternal mortality skyrocket in Texas, outpacing many other countries in the world. This is about healthcare. In Minnesota, we are ranked first in healthcare for a reason. We trust women, we trust doctors.
Senator, do you want to respond to the governor's claim? Will you create a federal pregnancy monitoring agency?
No, Nora, certainly we won't. And I want to talk about this issue because I know a lot of Americans care about it, and I know a lot of Americans don't agree with everything that I've ever said on this topic. And, you know, I grew up in a working class family in a neighborhood where I knew a lot of young women who had unplanned pregnancies and decided to terminate those pregnancies because they feel like they didn't have any other options. And, you know, one of them is actually very dear to me. And I know she's watching tonight, and I love you. And she told me something a couple years ago that she felt like if she hadn't had that abortion, that it would have destroyed her life because she was in an abusive relationship. And I think that what I take from that as a Republican who proudly wants to protect innocent life in this country, who proudly wants to protect the vulnerable, is that my party, we've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly
don't
just don't
behave like
trust us. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump and I
They don't
are
trust you
endeavoring to
because
do.
you're
I want
villains,
us as a
because you
Republican
lie
Party
constantly,
to be
because you've admitted
pro-family
to
in the
lie
fullest
and then
sense of the
continue
word.
to lie.
I want us to support fertility treatments. I want us to make it easier for
But you
moms
don't.
to afford to have babies. I want it to make it easier for
But you
young
haven't.
families to afford a home so they can afford a place to raise that
You
family.
voted
And I think
against
there's
that.
so much that we can do
You
on
say
the
you
public
want to do
policy
these
front
things, you have
just
the
to give
opportunity.
women
You,
more
JD Vance,
options.
voted
Now,
against
now,
all
of course, Donald Trump has been very clear that on the abortion
the
policy
infertility treatment.
specifically, that we have a
Affordable
big
housing.
country and it's diverse. And California has a
You
different
voted
viewpoint on
against
this
border
than
security.
Georgia. Georgia has a different viewpoint from
You are
Arizona. And the
liar.
proper way to handle this,
There's no
as
value
messy as democracy
in what you have
sometimes
to say.
is
Here,
to
I'll
let
prove it. There's literally no value in what you have to say because you lie. So any of the words you're saying cease to matter, JD Vance.
Well, the question got asked, and Donald Trump made the accusation that wasn't true about Minnesota. Well, let me tell you about this idea that there's diverse states. There's a young woman named Amber Thurman. She happened to be in Georgia, a restrictive state. Because of that, she had to travel a long distance to North Carolina to try and
Guy's a
get her
terrorist.
care. Amber
JD
Thurman
Vance
died
is a terrorist.
in that journey back
Those are
and forth.
facts.
The
You
fact of the
supported
matter is, how can we
supported
as a
terror.
nation say that
Those
your
are
life
facts.
and your rights,
You
as
gotta look in the
basic
mirror
as
and
the
decide
right
what
to
kind of
control
person
your
you are.
own body, is determined on
Not a good one.
geography? There's a very real chance
Figure
that
out
Amber
why
Thurman lived in Minnesota,
and then be
she
better.
would be alive today. That's why the restoration of
We're
Roe
not
versus
going to
Wade.
put up
When
with
you listen to
people
Vice President Harris
playing this
talk about
game
this subject and you hear me talk about it,
with the
you
lives
hear us
of our
talking
friends and
exactly
our
the same.
families
Donald
anymore.
Trump is trying to figure out how to get the political right of this. I agree with a lot of what Senator Vance said about what's happening. His running mate, though, does not,
Jersey
and that's the
Texan.
problem.
Governor, your
Vance's
time is up. Senator, let
guyliner
me
is on
ask you
point
about
tonight.
that.
Lean
He
in,
mentioned,
JD. We
was, I
got
think,
you.
referring to
Yeah.
a national ban. In the past, you have supported a federal ban on abortion after 15 weeks. In fact, you
And
said if someone can't
he is
support
a liar.
legislation like that, quote, you are making the United States the most barbaric pro-abortion regime anywhere in the entire world. My question is, why have you changed your position?
Well, Nora, first of all, I never supported a national ban. I did when I was running for Senate in 2022 talk about setting some minimum national standard. For example, we have a partial birth abortion ban in place in this country at the federal level. I don't think anybody's trying to get rid of that, or at least I hope not, though I know that Democrats have taken a very radical pro-abortion stance. But Nora, one of the things that changed is in the state of Ohio, we had a referendum in 2023, and the people of Ohio voted overwhelmingly, by the way, against my position. And I think that what I learned from that, Nora, is that we've got to do a better job at winning back people's trust. So many young women would love to have families. So many young women also see an unplanned pregnancy as something that's going to destroy their livelihood, destroy their education, destroy their relationships. And we have got to earn people's trust back. And that's why Donald Trump and I are committed to pursuing pro-family policies, making childcare more accessible, making fertility treatments more accessible, because we've got to do a better job at that. And that's what real leadership is.
Governor, your response.
I'm going to respond on the pro-abortion piece of that. No, we're not. We're pro-women. We're pro-freedom to make your own choice. We know what the implications are to not be that. Women having miscarriages, women not getting the care, physicians feeling like they may be prosecuted for providing that care. And as far as making sure that we're educating our children and giving them options, Minnesota's a state with one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates. We understand that too. We know that the options need to be available, and we make that true. We also make it, we're a top 3 state
Jersey Texan.
for the best place to raise children. But these two things to try and say that we're pro-children, but we don't like this, or you guys are pro-abortion, that's not the case at all. We are pro-freedoms for women to make their choices, and we're going, and Kamala Harris is making the case, to make options for children more affordable, a $6,000 child tax credit. But we're not going to base that on the backs of making someone like Amber Thurman drive 600 miles to try and get health care.
Senator?
May I respond to that? First of all,
I know it's the abortion talk. Well, maybe they're actually going to discuss
on this and explain this to me. But as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed
But no
into
one's
law,
winning so far.
it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think,
That's
whether
not
you're
true.
pro-choice or
That's not how the law
pro-abortion,
is.
that is fundamentally barbaric. And that's why I use that word, Nora, is because some of what we've seen, do you want to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will? Because Kamala Harris has supported suing Catholic nuns
Yeah, I do.
to violate their freedom of conscience. We can be a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of
absolutely do.
conscience and make the
You
country
offer
more
medical
pro-baby and
services,
pro-family.
you
But
must
please,
provide
Yes,
medical
Governor,
services.
please respond.
Look, this is one where there's always something there. This is a very simple proposition. These are women's decisions to make about their healthcare
Oh.
decisions, and the physicians
Libertarians,
who
I
know
want to
best
see
when
you
they need
all
to do this.
voting
Trying
for
to
Harris
distort
Walz.
the way a law is written
Libertarians.
to try and make a point, that's not it at all.
what was I wrong
This
about,
was-
Governor? Please tell me.
It-
What was
J.D.
I wrong
Vance
That is
about?
not the way the law is written. Look,
wants to take
I've
away
given
But
this,
how?
your rights
I've
to your
given this
own
advice on a lot of
body.
things that getting involved, getting against, that's been misread, and it was
They're
fact checked at the last
establishing
debate. But the
this
point on this is there's a
with abortion.
continuation of these guys to try and tell
First they
women
came
or to
for
get
the women,
involved.
and you
I
said
use
nothing.
this line on this, just mind your own business.
Then they
on
came
this.
for the trans
Things work
people, and you
best when
said
Roe
nothing.
versus Wade was in place. When we do a restoration of Roe, that works best. That doesn't
And
preclude
eventually they
us
say,
from increasing funding for children.
We
It
don't
doesn't
want
increase us from making sure that once that child's born,
people
like
who
in
rob
Minnesota,
banks
they get meals.
be able to have
They get
kids.
early childhood education.
We're going
They
to
get
force
health care.
sterilize
So
them.
the hiding behind we're going to do all these other
Say nothing.
things when you're not proposing them in your budget.
Eventually
Kamala
they
Harris
get
is
to you.
proposing them. She's proposing all those things to make life easier for families.
I asked a specific question, Governor. You gave me a slogan as a response.
It's not the case. It's not true. That's not what the law says. So they fact checked it with President Trump.
Gentlemen, there's a lot to
Boom.
discuss. We have to move on, and we're going to be right back with much more of the CBS News vice presidential debate in just a moment.
So here's what I'm gathering from this so far. The most pertinent question was asked: who's winning? No one. Either you have even a basic understanding of what these parties are trying to do, in which case you're you're already planning on voting for Harris and Walz, or you're misinformed. You actually have not just no idea what's going on, but you've listened to pure propaganda for years and years and years, and you are one of the 49% in the country, God help us, who is misinformed, and you're planning on voting for the Republicans. Or you are one of those groups of folks that has no idea what's going on, doesn't even have a wrong idea of what's going on. You only hear that Republicans, let me try this again. You only hear that Democrats say the Republicans are evil, evil, evil. And Republicans say Democrats are evil, evil, evil. Doesn't matter that the reality is Republicans actually are evil, undemocratic, unpatriotic, intending to take away your rights, having already had taken away basic rights that Americans enjoyed, fundamental rights to their own body. Doesn't matter. All they hear is that Democrats say the Republicans are bad and the worst thing you can imagine, and Republicans say the Democrats are bad. That's the strategy that the Republican Party has taken advantage of for 30 years, confusing everything, echoing the other side, so that people who don't pay attention thinks, well, that's just politics. People just yell in politics. Well, politics has sure gotten awfully drastic these days. So when they watch this, they don't know who's lying, who's not. When they watch this, they're just looking for vibes. So what are the vibes we're seeing? If you want to know how this is going to play out in the polls, just look at how these people kind of seem, because that's how shallow this is being judged. Pathetically shallow, by the way. Those Americans that have no idea what's going on and they hear all these drastic things people are saying, they've also consciously made the decision not to investigate it at all. Now, I happen to think the reason they do that is because they don't know how. They don't know how they can look this stuff up and understand it in a reasonable amount of time. So all they have to do, all they are able to do is go watch a debate like this. And when they do that, having no context for anything that's being said, not understanding one word of it, the judgments will be made entirely off the vibes. So vibe check, and you'll understand where the crucial progress is being made or not. And I think nothing really is happening here. I think we took a hit with Coach Walz having said he was in Tiananmen Square when he wasn't, and then being embarrassed by that fact and taking too long to answer the question. Just own up to it. J.D. Vance has been fact-checked a couple of times, though, because there was no way to continue the debate without establishing what reality was. They really had no choice. So that kind of balances it out. We're looking for a big embarrassing moment, and I don't think we're going to get that from Walz. I think we've experienced the worst we're going to get out of Walz so far. I think there's a chance we'll get that from J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance needs to get flustered and then say something he's not.
Leading cause of death for children and teens in America is by firearms. Senator Vance, you oppose most gun legislation that Democrats claim would curb gun violence. You oppose red flag gun laws and legislation to ban certain semi-automatic rifles, including AR-15s. So let me ask you, earlier this year, for the first time, the parents of a school shooter were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Do you think holding parents responsible could curb mass shootings? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, Nora, on that particular case, I don't know the full details, but I certainly trust local law enforcement and local authorities to make those decisions. I think in some cases the answer is going to be yes, and in some cases the answer is going to be no. And the details really matter here, of course. For example, if a kid steals a gun, that's going to be different than if a parent hands over a gun knowing that their kid is potentially dangerous. But look, I want to just sort of speak as a father of 3 beautiful little kids, and our oldest is now in 2nd grade. And like a lot of parents, we send our kids to school with such hope and such joy and such pride at their little faces on the first day of school. And we know, unfortunately, that a lot of kids are going to experience this terrible epidemic of gun violence. And of course, our hearts go out to the families that are affected by this terrible stuff. And we do have to do better. And I think that Governor Walz and I actually probably agree that we need to do better on this. The question is just, how do we actually do it? Now, here's something that really bothers me and worries me about this epidemic of violence. The gross majority, close to 90% in some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun violence in this country is committed with illegally obtained firearms. And while we're on that topic, we know that thanks to Kamala Harris's open border, we've seen a massive influx in the number of illegal guns run by the Mexican drug cartel. So that number, the amount of illegal guns in our country is higher today than it was 3.5 years ago. But what do we do about the schools? What do we do to protect our kids? And I think the answer is, and I say this not loving the answer, because I don't want my kids to go to school in a school that feels unsafe or where there are visible signs of security. But I unfortunately think that we have to increase security in our schools. We have to make the doors lock better. We have to make the doors stronger.
Under no circumstances can we say check for gun licenses or require gun licenses. That we can't do. The only thing, because, you know, it would be kind of annoying to have to carry around your gun license if you're a responsible gun owner. So instead, we have to let kids die or just terrify them. Have armed guards in the schools carrying guns.
And he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress,
that the first person
in my office
shooter doesn't kill,
surrounded by dozens of the Sandy Hook parents, and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-old were dead, and they were asking us to do something. And look, I'm a hunter. I own firearms.
An unstable kid with an assault rifle.
We understand that the Second Amendment is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out. In Minnesota, we've enacted enhanced red flag laws, enhanced background checks, and we can start to get data. But here's the problem. If we really want to solve this, we've got folks that won't allow research to be even done on gun violence. And this idea that we should just live with it. And here's what I do think, that this is a good start to the conversation. I 100% believe that Senator Vance hates it when these kids, it's abhorrent and it breaks your heart. I agree with that. But that's not far enough when we know there are things that worked. I've spent time in Finland and seen some Finnish schools. They don't have this happen, even though they have a high gun ownership rate in the country. There are reasonable things that we can do to make a difference. It's not infringing on your Second Amendment. And the idea to have some of these weapons out there, it just doesn't make any sense. Kamala Harris, as an attorney general, worked on this issue. She knows that it's there. No one's trying to scaremonger and say we're taking your guns, but I ask all of you out there, do you want your schools hardened to look like a fort? Is that what we have to go when we know there's countries around the world that their children aren't practicing these types of drills? They're being kids. We owe it to them to get a fix. These are things that shouldn't be that difficult. You can still keep your firearms, and we can make a difference. We have to. If you're listening tonight, this breaks your heart.
Have the humility.
Senator.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting. I'm sorry about that, and I hope that he's doing okay. Christ have mercy. It is awful, and I appreciate what Tim said actually about Finland, because I do think it illustrates some of the frankly weird differences between our own country's gun violence problem and Finland. Is okay. First of all, we have way higher rates of mental health abuse or mental health substance abuse. We have way higher rates of depression, way higher rates of anxiety. We unfortunately have a mental health crisis in this.
It's not a mental health problem. It's a gun problem. All right, here's a way that sci-fi writers can help people see the core issue here. Guns are going to keep getting deadlier. At some point, we will have a gun which no one can deny should not be in the hands of a civilian. We are going to have a laser pistol, and when you pull the trigger, it does a beam of light, perfectly straight, flying infinitely forward. The only thing that lets you dodge it is the curve of the earth. And if you turn it this way or that, steady beam, it cuts through all walls. Doesn't matter how many are there, stone, steel, whatever. It cuts through everything, just effing flattens it. At some point, that will exist. The question is going to be, will we have come up with a law by then in the United States? Will we have grown up by then?
Firearm deaths happen in Minnesota are rural suicides. And we have an epidemic of children getting guns and shooting themselves. And so we have, and we should look at all of the issues, making sure folks have health care and all that. But I want to be very careful. This idea of stigmatizing mental health, just because you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're violent. And I think what we end up doing is we start looking for a scapegoat. Sometimes it just is the guns. It's just the guns. And there are things that you can do about it. But I do think that this is one, and I think this is a healthy conversation. I think there's a capacity to find solutions on this that work, protect Second Amendment, protect our children. That's our priority.
Gentlemen, thank you,
Excellent
Margaret.
answer.
Thank you,
Sometimes
Noah.
it is just the gun.
Let's turn now to the top contributor to inflation, the high cost of housing and rent. There's a shortage of more than 4 million homes in the United States.
Good way to
and that
phrase that.
contributes to the high housing prices. Governor Walz, the Harris campaign promises a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers and a $10,000 tax credit. They also promise to build 3 million new homes. Where are you building these homes?
The reason I point out that is because of where we currently stand with assault rifles. We have the right to bear arms in the United States, but the arms we have were unimagined at the time.
It can be bought up, it can be shifted, it can be moved around. Those are not folks living in those houses. Those of you listening tonight, that house is a big deal. I bought and owned one house in my life. My mom still lives in the house where I was. And when I think of a house, I'm thinking of Christmas services after midnight mass where you go with your family. We need to make it more affordable. And one of the things, as I said, this program that the vice president is pushing forward and bringing a new way of approaching this is something we're doing in Minnesota from that lead. We in the state invested in making sure our housing was the biggest investment that we'd ever made in housing. It starts to make it easier. We cut some of the red tape. Local folks, look, we can't do it at the federal level, but local folks make it easier to build those homes. And then that down payment assistance. I can tell all of you out there, one of the certainly for me, using the GI Bill was one thing, but a veteran's home loan, the big thing about a veteran's home loan is you don't have to pay the down payment. Those are things that make it there. Now, look, you're going to pay it back and you're going to pay your mortgage. Those are things that we know in the long run, the appreciated value, the generational wealth that's created from it. And I will give Minneapolis an example. Minneapolis is the one city where we've seen the lowest inflation rates. We've seen a 12% increase in stock because we've put some of these things in, and we're implementing a state program to make sure we give some of that down payment assistance. We get it back from people because here's what we know. People with stable housing end up with stable jobs. People with stable housing have their kids able to get to school. All of those things in the long run end up saving our money. And that's the thing that I think we should be able to find some common ground in, but we can't blame immigrants for the only reason. That's not the case that's happening in many cities. The fact of the matter is that we don't have enough naturally affordable housing, but we can make sure that the government's there to help kickstart it, create that base.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, as far as your campaign's position, the promise is to seize federal lands to build homes, remove regulation, provide tax breaks, and cut back on immigration, which you say pushes up prices. Where are you going to build all the new homes you're promising? And what part of any of this plan will provide immediate relief? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Tim just said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher housing prices, but we do want to blame Kamala Harris for letting in millions of illegal aliens into this country, which does drive up costs, Tim. 25 million illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in the country. It's why we have massive increases in home prices that have happened right alongside massive increases in illegal alien populations under Kamala Harris's leadership. Now, Tim just mentioned a bunch of ideas. Now, some of those ideas I actually think are halfway decent, and some of them I disagree with. But the most important thing here is Kamala Harris is not running as a newcomer to politics. She is the sitting vice president. If she wants to enact all of these policies to make housing more affordable, I invite her to use the office that the American people already gave her, not sit around and campaign and do nothing while Americans find the American dream of homeownership completely unaffordable. Now, you asked, Margaret, what would immediately change the equation for American citizens if you lower energy prices? As Donald Trump says, drill, baby, drill. One of the biggest drivers of housing costs, aside from illegal immigration, is, think about it. If a truck driver's paying 40% more for diesel, then the lumber he's delivering to the job site to build a house is also going to become a lot more expensive. If we open up American energy, you will get immediate pricing relief for American citizens, not, by the way, just in housing, but in a whole host of other economic goods too.
Senator Vance, you still have 23 seconds there. Do you want to answer?
Can I have it?
Where? Yeah. Governor, we will get to you in a moment. But Senator, where are you going to seize the federal lands? Can you clarify?
Well, what Donald Trump has said is we have a lot of federal lands that aren't being used for anything. They're not being used for national park. They're not being used, and they could be places where we build a lot of housing. And I do think that we should be opening up building in this country. We have a lot of land that could be used. We have a lot of Americans that need homes. We should be kicking out illegal immigrants who are competing for those homes, and we should be building more homes for the American citizens who deserve to be here.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, I do want to let you respond to the allegation the vice president is letting in.
Well, of course, not true. And again, you have facts. I guess we agree not to fact check. I'll check. Crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left office. But it's, again, blaming and not trying to find the solution. I was going to ask, though, on this question, are we going to drill and build houses in the same federal land? And I think when people hear federal lands, these are really important pieces of land. Now, Minnesota doesn't have a lot of federal lands. I know in the western part of the countries we do. There's not a lot of federal lands in and around Minneapolis, for example. So the issue is I don't understand the federal lands issue unless we see this, and I worry about this as someone who cares deeply about our national parks and our federal lands. Look, Minnesota, we protect these things. We've got about 20% of the world's fresh water. These lands protect. They're there for a reason. They belong to all of us. But again, this is when you view housing and you view these things as commodities. Like, there's a chance to make money here. Let's take this federal land and let's sell it to people for that. I think there's better ways to do this. We've seen it in Minnesota. We're able to refurbish some of these houses. We're able to make some investments. That gets people in. And I'm still on the fact on this. economists. Senator Vance, you said you don't like the economists. Which economists are saying that it is immigrants that's adding to the cost?
Governor,
Where's the
your
study?
your time is up, but Senator, on
Who said
that
it was
point,
immigrants?
I'd like
He
for you
said.
to clarify, there are many contributing factors to high housing costs. What evidence do you
Here
have
we go.
that migrants are
Yeah,
part
you
of this
racist.
problem?
Well, there's a Federal Reserve study that we're happy to share after the debate. We'll put it up on social media,
please
actually,
do.
that really drills down on the connection between increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course, Margaret, that's not the entire driver of higher housing prices. It's also the regulatory regime of Kamala Harris. Look, we are a country of
Facts,
builders. We're a
Latino
country of
Mukume.
doers.
Well
We're a
put.
country of explorers.
Privatizing.
But we increasingly have a federal
To be fair, we're a country that got lost on its way to trying to find another country. Privatizing public resources is stealing from the public. Yes, sir. That is what is fundamentally wrong with what Vance is pitching here, what Trump wants to do. We want to take national land, give it to corporations to build homes, to sell other people homes, to sell national land. Not something that's helping.
I don't necessarily disagree with that, that in some cases, many of those are local, many of them are state. I don't know which ones are federal, but I think whenever we talk regulations, people think they can get rid of them. I think you want to be able to get out of your house in a fire. I think you want to make sure that it's fireproof and those types of things. So which are the regulations? Because the vice president's not responsible for those. Congress writes those.
Governor, thank you. Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. You're passionate about the housing crisis, I can tell. But Nora?
Thank you. One of the top problems facing Americans is the high cost of health care. Senator Vance, at the last presidential debate, former President Trump was asked about replacing the Affordable Care Act. In response, he said,
No, sir.
I have
I'm
concepts
going to mute it
of a plan.
periodically. I'm sorry.
Since then, Senator,
I'm
you've
just not
talked about
interested in
changing how
everything that-
chronically ill Americans get health insurance. Can you explain how that would work? And can you guarantee that Americans with pre-existing conditions won't pay more?
Agreed,
I'll
fellow
give you 2
Tracy.
minutes.
We need
Well, of
human
course,
exclusion.
we're going to cover
zones.
Americans with pre-existing conditions. In fact, a lot of my family members have gotten health care. I believe, members of my family actually got private health insurance, at least for the first time, switched off of Medicaid onto private insurance for the first time under Donald Trump's leadership. And I think that, a lot of people have criticized this concepts of a plan remark. Look, it's very simple common
Not
sense.
always,
I think it's
but I
Tim
can
Walz
be
knows from
as
12 years in
nasty.
Congress. You're not going to propose a 900-page bill standing on a debate stage. It would bore everybody to tears, and it wouldn't actually mean anything because part of this is the give and take of bipartisan negotiation. Now, when Donald Trump was actually president, and again, he has a record to be proud of, prescription drugs fell in 2018 for the first time in a very long time. Under Kamala Harris's leadership, prescription drugs are up about 7%. Under Donald
Why
Trump's
does he keep
entire 4
saying
years, they were
Kamala
up about
Harris's
1.5%. He introduced pricing
Somebody should make
transparency.
fun of
Think
him
about
for
healthcare.
not
You go
knowing
into a hospital,
that
you
she's
try to
the
buy
vice president.
something, and nobody knows what it
Of course, he
actually
does know
costs.
that.
That
He
price
knows he's
transparency
lying.
will actually give American consumers a little bit
He's
more
trying to tell
choice
the lie
and will
over and
also drive
over,
down
so it
costs.
feels
And we talked
right
about,
those
the
people that
reinsurance
don't pay
regulations is
attention
what
at
I
all.
was talking about. Look, Donald Trump has said that if we allow states to experiment a little bit on how to cover both the chronically ill but the non-chronically ill, it's not just a plan. He actually implemented some of these regulations when he was president of the United States. And I think you can make a really good argument that it salvaged Obamacare,
gonna watch
which was
that after
doing
this.
disastrously until Donald Trump came along. And I think this is an important point about President Trump. Of course, you don't have to agree with everything that President Trump has ever said or ever done. But when Obamacare was crushing under the weight of its
The
own
reason
regulatory burden and
I
healthcare
think-
costs,
I'm gonna
Donald Trump
compromise
could have
with lightning
destroyed the
rod.
program. Instead, he worked in
Turn
a
the volume
bipartisan
down
way
by
to
half.
ensure that
The
Americans had
reason
access to
lefties,
affordable
I
care.
think,
It's not
drink and
perfect, of
watch
course,
these
and there's so
is,
much
is
more that we
because
could
of
do,
the
but I
dynamic
think that
I
Donald
described
Trump has
earlier.
earned the right to
Uh,
put in place some better healthcare policies.
Maybe they're
He's
going to go to a
earned it
break soon.
because he
and we'll
did
talk
it
more
successfully
about
the first time.
All right, here's where being an old guy gives you some history. I was
Yeah,
there
I'll do this during
at
the
the
break.
creation of the ACA. And the reason it was so important is I come from a major healthcare state, home of the Mayo Clinic, home to Medical Alley.
I hate that
3M,
these two
Medtronic, all
like
of those.
each
We
other a little
understand
bit.
healthcare. It's why we're ranked first on affordability
It's
and
probably
accessibility and quality of healthcare. And so what
Because when
I know
Trump
is
goes
under
up and is
Kamala
hateful,
Harris,
people will be like, "Oh, I
more
miss
people
when
are
they liked
covered
each
than they
other."
have before. And those of you listening, this is critical to you. Now, Donald Trump all of a sudden wants to go back and remember this. He ran on the first thing he was going to do on day one was to repeal Obamacare. On day one, he tried to sign an executive order to repeal the ACA. He signed on to a lawsuit to repeal the ACA, but lost at the Supreme Court. And he would have repealed the ACA had it not been for the courage of John McCain to save that bill. Now,
Yeah,
fast
but
forward, what that means to you is
I like
you
being
lose your
a little bit
pre-existing conditions.
dangerous in a
If you're
very
sitting at home and
lazy
you got
way.
asthma, too bad. If you're a woman, probably not. Broke your foot during football, might kick you out. Your kids get kicked out when they're 26. Kamala Harris negotiated drug prices for the first time with Medicare. We have 10 drugs that will come online, the most common ones that'll be there. But look, this issue, and when Donald Trump said, I've got a concept of a plan, it cracked me up as a fourth grade teacher because my kids would have never given me that. But what
Oh,
Senator
yes.
Vance just explained
And
might be worse than a concept because what he explained is pre-Obamacare. And I'll make this as simple as possible because I have done this for a long time. What they're saying is, if you're healthy, why should you be paying more? So what they're going to do is let insurance companies pick who they insure because guess what happens? You pay your premium, it's not much. They figure they're not going to have to pay out to you. But those of you a little older, gray, got cancer, you're going to get kicked out of it. That's why the system didn't work. Kamala Harris will
Damn.
protect and enhance the ACA.
Governor, thank you.
Just
Senator,
explain
you
what's
have
wrong with
not yet
private
explained
healthcare
how you would
in
protect
under
people with
15
pre-existing
seconds.
conditions or laid out that plan.
Well, look, we
That's-
currently
that's what
have
folks
laws
need
and
to hear.
regulations in place
what
right
the
now that protect
undecided
people
folks
with
need to hear.
pre-existing conditions. We
I'm
want to keep
changing the
those
score.
regulations in
It's
place, but we
now
also want to
Walt
make the health insurance marketplace function a little bit better. Now, what Governor Walz just said is actually not true. A lot of what happened and the reason that Obamacare was crushing under its own weight is that a lot of young and healthy people were leaving the exchanges. Donald Trump actually helped address that problem, and he did so in a way that preserved people's access to coverage who had pre-existing conditions.
Access
But
to
again,
coverage.
something that these
You can
guys
still
do is
pay
they
money
make a
as
lot
long
of
as you have
claims
that money.
about if Donald Trump becomes president,
They have
all
to
of these
have a lot
terrible
of it.
consequences are going to ensue. But in reality, Donald Trump was president. Inflation
Great
was
answer
low.
from Walz.
Take-home pay was
Fantastic.
higher. And he saved the very program from a Democratic administration that was collapsing and would have collapsed absent his leadership. He did his job, which is govern in a
Yes,
bipartisan
that's
way and
audio.
get results, not just complain about problems, but actually solve them.
Governor, did enrollment under the Affordable Care Act go up under the Trump administration?
It's higher now that we've seen it go up. Look, people are using it. The system works. And the question about this of young people, or whatever, that's the individual mandate piece of this. And Republicans fought tooth and nail
Jersey Tech
saying,
and
well, Americans
any
should be
word
free to
from
do this. Well, then
Letterhead,
So
what
you
know
think
happens?
the
what I'm
individual mandate's a good idea?
You shrink.
Trying not to be.
I think the idea of making sure the risk pool
fretting
is broad
Freddie,
enough to cover
but
everyone, that's the
I'm,
only way insurance works.
Fretting.
When it
I'm a
doesn't,
little
it
nervous,
collapses.
frankly.
You are asking pre-ACA
Last I heard,
where we
he
get
was
people
safe,
out.
but
Look,
man, no power
people
till Friday.
know
That's
that they need to be on health care.
not good.
People expect it to be there. And when we are able to make it, and we are making it this way,
Sam Cedars
when
is
we incentivize people to be in the market, when we help people who might not be able to afford it get there, and we make sure then when you get sick and old, it's there for you. Because I heard people say, well, I don't want to buy into Medicare or whatever. Good luck buying healthcare once you get past 70. So look, the ACA works. We can continue to do better. Kamala Harris did that. The way she made everything better was negotiating those 10 drugs on Medicare for the first time in American history.
Thank you. Margaret?
Can I
We're-
address that?
I apologize. We're out of
Go
time.
ahead,
We have a
Laura.
number of subjects to discuss. Margaret?
Let's talk about families in America. There is a childcare crisis
Sure.
in this country, and the United States is one of the very few
I'm gonna be
developed countries
fascinated
in the
to see
world
this.
without a national paid leave program for new parents. Governor Walz, you've said that if Democrats
Republicans have just
win
been
both the
winning
White
for
House
too
and
long.
Congress, this is a
And
day
it's
one
become
priority
obvious
for
that they
you.
are the source of
How
most
long
of
should
our
employers
problems.
be
If you
required to
pay
pay
even a
workers while
slight
they are
amount of
home
attention.
taking care of their newborns? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's negotiable. And
Get 'em,
that's what
Walz.
Congress worked. But here's what the deal is. Americans sitting out there right now, you may work for a big company. Look, we're home in Minnesota to some of the largest Fortune 500 companies. Kamala Harris knows that in California. Those companies provide paid family and medical leave. One is, I think they're moral and they think it's a good thing, but it also keeps their employees healthy. We in Minnesota passed a paid family and medical leave. You have a child, and I had to go back to work 5 days after my kids were born. This allows you to stay home a certain amount of time. What we know is that gets the child off to a better start. The family works better. We stay in their employers. We get more consistency in that. So Kamala Harris has made it a priority. We implemented it in Minnesota and we see growth. That's how you become a pro-business state. But the negotiations on it, and here's the issue. Those big companies are able to offer it. Those of you out there who don't have it, just imagine what happens if you get cancer or your child gets sick. We know what happens. You end up staying home. In some cases, that means no paycheck because you've got no protection on that. This is the case of an economy that Donald Trump has set for the wealthiest amongst us. He's willing to give those tax breaks to the wealthiest. He's willing to say, bust those unions up, do whatever. What we're saying is the economy works best when it works for all of us. And so a paid family medical leave program, and I will tell you, go to the families or go to the businesses and ask them. As far as childcare on this, you have to take it at both the supply and the demand side. You
Walz
can't
is finding
expect the
his
most
stride.
important people
He
in
is
our lives
doing a
to
bunch
take care of our
of
children
populist messaging.
or our
This is what
parents
we need.
to get paid
This
the
is
least
what
amount of
Democrats
money.
need.
And we have to make it easier for folks
Incidentally, it's
to
true.
be able to get into that business and then to make sure that
Let's
folks are
help
able to pay for that.
people that
We were
don't
able
need
to do
help.
it in Minnesota, and I'm still telling you this. We were listed
Democrats
as the
want
best
to make
state.
an
We're still in
America
crisis on this. A
where the
federal
average
program of
person
paid family and medical
can
leave
act-
and help with this
can
will
actually
enhance our workforce, enhance
have
our
a life.
families, and make it easier to have the children that you want.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, do you support a national paid leave program? And
No.
if so, for how long should employers be mandated
Let's hear why
to
the
pay their
answer is no.
employees while they are home taking care of their newborn? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, first of all, Margaret, a number of my Republican colleagues and some Democrats too have worked on this issue. And I think there is a bipartisan solution here because a lot of us care about this issue. I mean, look, I
Not gonna be
speak from
national paid
this
family
very
leave?
personally because I'm married to a beautiful woman who's an incredible mother to our 3 beautiful kids, but is also a very, very brilliant corporate litigator. And I'm so proud of her. But being a working mom, even for somebody with all of the advantages of my wife, is extraordinarily difficult. And it's not just difficult from a policy perspective. She actually had access to paid family leave because she worked for a bigger company. But the cultural pressure on young families and especially young women, I think makes it really hard for people to choose the family model they want. A lot of young women would like to go back to work immediately. Some would like to spend a little time home with the kids. Some would like to spend longer at home with the kids. We should have a family care model that makes choice possible. And I think this is a very important substantive difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's approach. I mean, look, if you look at the federal programs that we have that support paid family leave right now, the Community Development Block Grant, and there's another block grant program that spends a lot of money from the federal government. These programs only go to one kind of childcare model. Let's say you'd like your church maybe to help you out with childcare. Maybe you live in a rural area or an urban area and you'd like to get together with families in your
So he's
neighborhood
saying
to provide childcare in the way that makes the most sense.
the
You don't
government
get
won't do
access to
anything.
any of these federal monies. We want to
We
promote
will not
choice
do
in
anything.
how
You
we
can put us
deliver
in
family
power.
care and how we promote childcare. Because look, it is
Make
unacceptable.
it cultural.
And, you know, of course, Tim and I have been on the campaign trail a lot
Make
the
it
past 7 or
cultural.
8 weeks. And one of the biggest
Don't make it
complaints
my
I hear from young
responsibility.
families is people who
Somebody
feel like they
else's.
don't have options, like they're choosing between going to work or taking care for their kids. That is an incredible burden to put on American families. We're the only country that does it. I think we could do a heck of a lot better.
Senator, thank you. You have also said, Senator Vance, many
That's it
things
exactly.
about the American family.
And that's
The
the
Federal
Republican
Reserve
strategy.
says parents
Hide as much
will
of
spend
your
nearly as
plans
much on
possible.
child care as they do on housing each month. So I want to get your thoughts on this. President Trump recently said, as much as child care is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kinds of numbers we'll be taking in. Is President Trump committed to the $5,000
yeah.
per child tax credit that you have described? You have 1 minute.
Well, what President Trump said, Margaret, I just want to defend my running mate here a little bit, is that we're going to be taking in a lot of money
luck.
by penalizing companies for shipping jobs overseas
Really, I
and
hope you
penalizing
step on a banana
countries who
peel and
employ
break,
slave laborers and then ship their products back into our country and
both
undercut the
hips
wages of
somehow?
American workers. It's the
One of
heart
your
of the
knees,
Donald
an
Trump
elbow?
economic plan. Cut taxes for American
if you-
workers and American families. Cut taxes for businesses that are hiring and building companies in the United States of America, but penalize companies and countries that are shipping jobs overseas. That's the heart of the economic proposal. And I think what President Trump is saying is that when we bring in this additional revenue with higher economic growth, we're going to be able to provide paid family leave, childcare options that are viable and workable for a lot of American families.
Can you clarify how that will solve the childcare shortage?
Well, because as Tim said, a lot of the child care shortage is we just don't have enough resources going into the multiple people who could be providing family care options. And we're going to have to, unfortunately, look, we're going to have to spend more money. We're going to have to induce more people to want to provide child care options for American families. Because the reason it's so expensive right now is because you've got way too few people providing this very essential service.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, your ticket
We're living
also
under
has some
the
child care
Republican
tax
way
credit
right now.
proposals.
That's the
Do
reality.
you think Congress will
We're living
agree
in
to
a
the $6,000
conservative
credit for
United
newborns and $3,000
a
credit for
shambles.
children over the age of 6, as your campaign has promised? Is that realistic?
More and more, we're going to hear
Well,
that
if
from
these members of Congress are listening to
Just you.
anybody, I can tell you, and
We got what we
this is
wanted.
the biggest
know
issue.
you
Everybody
hate it.
listening tonight knows. I mean, I'm sure they were shocked to hear it's not that expensive. And let's be clear, whether it's 5,000 or 6,000, that pays you about 3 or 4 months. Let's be clear of where we're at on this. It's because we got out of an imbalance on this. We thought we were going to get by not paying people. I don't think Senator Vance and I are that far apart. I'm not opposed to what he's talking about on options. We've done scholarships types of things. I think we need to be open to making the case. But the
Walz
issue here is,
being
the
too
question you
chummy
asked is, you're not
with
going to pay for it with these
villainy,
tariffs.
in my
That's
opinion.
just adding another 4,000 on the family and taking less. So
But
not
maybe
only do
add-
they not get the money to pay for that, they're $4,000 in the hole. That's Wharton School. That's his alma mater. And
He
so
doesn't
I
deserve
think the
that.
issue here is, if those members of Congress, I can't believe they're not. When I go to businesses, sure, they'll talk about taxes sometime, but they will lead with
God is
child
gonna
care
smite
and they will lead
JD
with
for lying
housing,
in
because
public.
we know the
Ooh.
problem is, especially in a state like Minnesota, we need
Don't
more
you
workers because our economy's growing, but we need the workforce.
Governor, thank you. We need to move on. Nora?
Let's talk about the state of democracy, the top issue for Americans after the economy and inflation. After the 2020 election, President Trump's campaign and others filed 62 lawsuits contesting
Great
the
question.
results.
Okay.
Judges, including those appointed by President Trump and other Republican presidents, looked at the evidence and said there was no widespread fraud. The governors of every state in the nation, Republicans and Democrats, certified the 2020 election results and sent a legal slate of electors to Congress for
Progressives
January
should not think
6th.
we are the majority. That's
Senator
true.
Vance, you have said you would
A
not
lot
have
of work to do.
certified the last presidential election and would have asked the states to submit alternative electors.
In
That
other
has been
words,
called
participated in the
unconstitutional
coup.
and illegal. Would you again seek to challenge this year's election results, even if every governor certifies the results?
Tinkerbell, I
I'll give you 2
disagree,
minutes.
Jake. Walz being
Well, Nora, first of
cordial
all,
and
I think that we're
genuine
focused on the
resonates
future.
with
We need to
me
figure out how to
tired of
solve the
Trump.
inflation
People are
crisis
hoping
caused
to
by
feel
Kamala Harris's
fair.
policies, make
Fair
housing
point.
affordable, make groceries affordable, and that's what we're focused on. But I want to answer your question because you did ask it.
JD
Look, what
as
President
the
Trump
villain,
has said
treating
is
him
that there were
as the
problems
villain
in
for this
2020,
moment right
and my own belief is that we should fight about
still
those
makes good
issues, debate those issues
Right now,
peacefully in the
this guy
public square. And that's all
trying
I've
to
said,
make
and that's all
fool
that Donald
seem
Trump has said.
reasonable.
Remember, he said that on January the 6th,
now,
the protesters
that's what he's
ought to
doing.
protest peacefully. And on January the 20th, what happened? Joe Biden became the president. Donald Trump left the White House. And now, of course, unfortunately, we have all of the negative policies that have come from the Harris-Biden administration. I believe that we actually do have a threat to democracy in this
So
country,
you
but
act like
unfortunately,
this
it's
guy's,
not the threat
"Hey,
to
we
democracy
can-
that
we
Kamala
un- we
Harris and
come
Tim
to
Walz want to talk
understand."
about. It is the threat of
I know.
censorship.
Come to the
It's
speed debate.
Americans casting aside lifelong
stage.
friendships because of disagreements over politics. It's big technology
be made
companies
clear,
silencing their
I
fellow citizens. And it's Kamala Harris saying that rather than
This
debate
dude
and persuade her
is a
fellow
lying,
Americans, she'd like to censor people who
participating
engage in misinformation. I think that is a much bigger
That's it.
threat to democracy than anything
You're
that
right.
we've seen in this country in the
You're
last
right.
4 years,
Goals
in the
win.
last 40
Goals
years.
defeat.
Now, I'm really proud, especially
it.
given that I
All
was
that
raised
matters.
by two
The next 30
lifelong
days,
blue-collar Democrats, to have
Just
the endorsement
eat 'em.
of Bobby Kennedy Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard,
So, yeah, be nice.
lifelong leaders in
Admin.
the Democratic coalition. And of course, they don't agree with me and Donald Trump on every issue. We don't have to agree on every issue.
My
But we're
strategy
united
is
behind a
but
basic American First Amendment principle
good at
that we
being
ought to
nice.
debate our differences.
Be
We ought to argue about them. We ought to try to persuade our fellow Americans. Kamala Harris is engaged in censorship at an industrial scale. She did it during COVID. She's done it over a number of other issues. And that to me is a much bigger threat to democracy than what Donald Trump said when he said that protesters should peacefully protest on January the 6th.
Governor?
Well, I've enjoyed tonight's debate, and I think there was a lot of commonality here. And I'm sympathetic to misspeaking on things, and I think I might have with the senator. But
me too, man.
There's one though that this one is troubling to me, and I say that because I think we need to tell the story.
Trump
Donald
voters
Trump
are not,
refused
but-
to acknowledge
but-
this, and the fact is that I don't think we can be the
There
frog
are,
in
I
the pot
think,
and let the boiling water go
Republican
up.
voters
He was
that
very
will
clear.
not vote
I mean, he
Trump
lost this election,
given the
and he
option.
said he didn't. 140 police officers were beaten at the Capitol that day.
Boom,
Some
there
with
we
the American flag, several
All right,
later
thank
died. And it
you.
wasn't
Win twice
just in
over.
there. In
'Cause he's
Minnesota, a
being
group
nice
gathered on the
and
state
making
capitol
it
grounds
good.
in St. Paul and said, we're marching to the governor's residence and there may be casualties. The only person there was my son and his dog, who was rushed out crying by state police. That issue and Mike Pence standing there as they were chanting, hang Mike Pence. Mike Pence made the right decision. So, Senator, it was adjudicated over and over and over. I worked with kids long enough to know, and I said as a football coach, sometimes you really want to win, but the democracy is bigger than winning an election. You shake hands, and then you try and do everything you can to help the other side win. That's what was at stake here. Now, the thing I'm most concerned about is the idea that
Now, this one.
imprisoning your political opponents, already laying the groundwork for people not accepting this. And a president's words matter. A president's words matter. People hear that. So
That's true.
I think this issue of settling our differences at the ballot box, shaking hands when we lose, being honest about it, but to deny what happened on January 6th, the first time in American history
Yes.
that a president or anyone tried to overturn a fair election and the peaceful transfer of power. And here we are 4 years later in the same boat. I will tell you this, that when this is over, we need to shake hands this election, and the winner needs to be the winner. This has got to stop. It's tearing our
Yeah.
country apart.
Make them agree to it now.
Margaret?
Senator Vance, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, look, Tim.
Will you commit
first
to
of
the
all,
peaceful transfer of power,
It's really
Senator
rich
Vance?
for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power on January the
did
20th,
not.
as we have done
He
for
didn't.
250 years
he
in
was
this country.
made to.
We're
He
going to
had
shake
no
hands
choice.
after this debate and after this election. And of course, I hope that we win, and I think we're going to win. But if Tim Walz is the next vice president, he'll have my prayers, he'll have my best wishes, and he'll have my help whenever he wants it. But we have to remember that for years in this country, Democrats protested the results of elections. Hillary Clinton in 2016 said that Donald Trump had the election stolen by Vladimir Putin because the Russians bought like $500,000 worth of Facebook ads. This has been going on for a long time. And if we want to say that we need to respect the results of the election, I'm on board. But if we want to say,
me
as
too.
Tim Walz is saying, that this is just a problem that
J.D.
Republicans have
Vance would
had,
not have
I don't
certified
buy
the
that.
election. Yep.
Governor?
January 6th
Dude's a
was not
traitor.
Facebook ads. And I think a revisionist history on this. Look, I don't understand how we got to this point. But the issue was that happened. Donald Trump can do it. And all of us say
Being
there's no
nice
place for
traitors,
this. It has massive repercussions. This idea that there's censorship to stop people from threatening to kill someone, threatening to do something, that's not censorship. Censorship is book banning. We've seen that.
Boom.
We've seen that brought up. I just think for everyone tonight,
This is a debate
I'm
being
gonna
decided by
thank
inches.
Senator Vance. I think this
Walz
is
is
the conversation they
winning
want to hear. And I
inch
think
by
there's a
inch.
lot of agreement. But this is one that we are miles apart on. This
Half
was a
the
threat
audience
to our
stopped watching
democracy
after
in a
20
way that we
minutes,
had
and
not
they will
seen.
say it was tied.
And it
The other
manifested
half,
itself because of Donald Trump's inability to
is
say. He is still saying he didn't
and
lose
this
the
will
election.
be
I would just
an
have to,
election
did he lose the
decided
2020 election?
by
Tim,
inches.
I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from
focused
speaking
on the
their mind
future,
in the
'cause we
wake
did all those
of
crimes,
the 2020
4
COVID
years ago.
situation?
That is
Has she tried
that is a damning non-answer.
Has she? It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were
And he's
problems in
getting under
2020.
the
We've
J.D.
talked
Vance's
about it.
skin.
I'm happy to
This
talk
is
about
what
it
we
further.
needed.
But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most
Yeah.
sacred right under the United States democracy is
Yeah.
the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First
You are
Amendment right
rightly
to
attacked for not
misinformation.
believing in
Kamala
democracy
Harris
in
wants
a
to use
democracy.
the
Threatening or
power
hate
of
speech.
government and
True
big tech to
participant.
silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another.
Yeah,
Let's
I
argue
reject
about ideas,
profanity.
and then let's
Yeah,
come together
that much I
afterwards.
You
do.
can't yell
And I
fire in a
think
crowded
he
theater.
belongs in prison.
That's the
Yeah.
test. That's the Supreme Court test.
Tim, fire in a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't
Senator,
wear
the governor
masks.
does
That's
have the
not
floor.
Sorry.
fire in a crowded theater. That is criticizing the policies of the government, which is the
Interrupt.
right of every American.
Senator, the governor does have the floor for 1 minute to
Please.
respond to you.
Yeah. Well, I don't run Facebook. What I do know is I see a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and this I'm pretty shocked by this. He lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not. It's not anything anywhere other than in Donald Trump's world. Because look, when Mike Pence made that decision
Candidate he
to
lost
certify
4
that
years.
election,
Why is he running
that's
now?
why Mike Pence isn't on this stage. What I'm concerned about
Yes,
is
sir.
where is the firewall with Donald Trump? Where is the firewall if he knows he could do anything, including taking an election, and his vice president's not going to stand to it? That's what we're asking you, America.
This is what we
Will
need.
you stand up? Will you keep your oath of office, even if the president doesn't? And I think Kamala Harris would agree. She wouldn't have picked me if she didn't think I would do that, because of course that's what we would do. So America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
Governor,
only
your
thing
time is
that
up.
needs to be
Thank
discussed
you,
in-
gentlemen. We will be right back with
Good.
both of our candidates, the CBS News vice presidential debate.
All right. So recap of the second part. Tim Walz pulling ahead, and he continues to. Looking at it from the perspective of somebody who does not pay attention to any of this, he is making clear the fundamental problems. What's Donald Trump for? He's for making wealthy people's lives even easier and making everybody else's lives much harder to pay for it. What is the threat he represents? Aside from bad governance, he doesn't believe in democracy. He's doing a great job of that. What I was saying earlier, in response to Sam and Emma getting smashed on stream, why do we have this ritual that we kind of do with the debates now? The whole wicked community, lefties across the internet, because of the dynamic I described earlier. We know what we're seeing. We know who these people are. I bet any one of you could write just generically the responses these people will do to the questions. I bet if Donald James X was asked, he could sit down and be like, okay, in response to this question, JD Vance will talk about nothing related to it for 30 seconds and then give a non-answer because he believes in not giving health care to Americans. And he'd be correct. And so could all of you. Why are Sam and Emma getting smashed on screen? Because it's deeply depressing and also a little bit fun in a weird way. Like going to a whorehouse the night after your divorce. It's a sad but kind of fun experience to watch this stuff and know that it's people who neither of which are ideal options, but one of which is a terrible option. And they're trying to appease people who are going to make a hugely consequential decision based on a terrifyingly small amount of information. And we do this every 4 years. And it's fun to be here with you. I'll say that. It is truly fun for me to share this with the wicked community. It's fun to laugh at the villains when they screw up and cheer for the de facto heroes, but it is also the sort of thing that encourages us to drink. And look, I'm sticking to Diet Coke this time. But that's simply because I didn't think to buy a giant bottle of the worst piss I could find. It just didn't occur to me. I had a hankering for Diet Coke more than anything. Raspberry lemonade and vodka for the win. Oh, lordy Lou. Yes, ma'am. Who's getting drunk besides drink? I've been drinking Diet Coke. I will probably after this go scrounge up a bottle of something foul, but you know, Jersey Texan. I'm drinking vodka. Leftists need it. However, we do need to be more focused, angry, and focused, angry, and do you see what the vodka is doing to my typing? Damn it. Look, we're gonna be all right. Here's the deal. We have to win in 30 days. I think we will win. When we win, it will really, really help. Really, really help if we win the House and Senate as well. No matter what happens, it will still be our job to do this next thing. The next step is going to be converting existing bad politicians into good ones. It was done with Gretchen Whitmer. It can be done with others. We have seen bad politicians get converted into terrible ones with MAGA. We are going to have to undertake the task next of converting bad politicians into acceptable politicians. That's what Wicked is going to be doing starting November 7th.
Surprised as anybody of this coalition that Kamala Harris has built, from Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney to Taylor Swift, and a whole bunch of folks in between there. And they don't all agree on everything, but they are truly optimistic people. They believe in a positive future of this country and one where our politics can be better than it is. And I have to tell you that that better than it is the sense of optimism that there can be an opportunity economy that works for everyone, not just to get by, but to get ahead. And the idea that freedom really means something. Not the freedom of government to be in your bedroom or exam room, but the freedom for you to make choices about yourself.
Okay, mother.
Now, look, we all know who Donald Trump is. He's told us, and as Maya Angelou said, believe him when he told you that. His first inaugural address talked about American carnage. And then he spent 4 years trying to maybe do that.
I'm going to mute him.
Senator Vance tonight made.
Because this is interesting. What changed Whitmer? I'll go back to the debate in a moment, but this is genuinely more important to all of our futures. What changed my governor, Gretchen Whitmer? She got elected right after Trump got elected. When that happened, folks who were paying attention to politics in Michigan at the time all saw the same fascinating thing, which is that the places that voted for Trump in the Democratic primaries, they all went to Bernie Sanders. In other words, we all saw that the actual way to reach people who were places, let's say, the actual way to reach places that were not supporting Democrats was not to be shittier Democrats, but was in fact to be earnest about your beliefs and your intentions. Gretchen Whitmer, on top of that, was dealing with the gerrymandering in Michigan at the time and realized that her best political strategy was to play to the base. And she did that, and it paid off. Following that, polls came back showing that the policies she put in place, basically to please leftists, were popular with everyone. So she doubled down and she doubled down. As she did this, eventually, a bunch of right-wing psychos tried to kidnap her. They hated her so much, but her popularity throughout the state up. In other words, she saw advantage to playing to the left. And once she started doing that, she saw herself get more popular and has since needed no other encouragement because she's a smart lady. She is a neoliberal centrist. Don't get me wrong. Her instincts will always be to the right of where I am. But She's a good model for how this can happen. We can also make this happen simply by being in contact with our representatives more often. All right, back to the debate. It looks like J.D. Vance is
credible people anywhere in the world, but they're not going to be able to achieve their full dreams with the broken leadership that we have in Washington. They're not going to be able to live their American dream if we do the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3.5 years. We need change. We need a new direction. We need a president who has already done this once before and did it well. Please vote for Donald Trump. And whether you vote for me or vote for Tim Walz, I just want to say I'm so proud to be doing this, and I'm rooting for you. God bless you, and good night.
Senator Vance, thank you. And thank you both for participating in the only vice presidential debate of this election cycle. I'm Margaret Brennan.
And I'm Nora O'Donnell. And a reminder, there are just 35 days until Election Day. Please get out and vote. And for all of us here at CBS News, thank you and good night.
How great would it have been? Oh, look at them. Oh, they're chatting. That's adorable. How great would it have been if she would have been like, and from all of us here at CBS News, thank you, and go yourself. It would have been delightful. All right. Overall thoughts on the debate, real quick, before we go back to talking about the thing that interests my ADHD brain instead. Pretty solid. We were just hoping for no major mistakes. Fox and other outlets that have an agenda are going to try their damnedest to smear Walz for the Tiananmen Square thing. Not because he gave a bad answer. He just gave a long answer. That's all. All he had to do was be quiet quickly, and he didn't. He could have just said, I misspoke. Whatever. He could have even said, I lied. I didn't mean to, but I did. I was nervous in the moment. I tried to sound more awesome than I was. Literally, speed is all that mattered in that answer. But here's the other bad news. That happened early in the debate as well, which means a lot of folks who were just like, oh, let me watch 15 minutes of this. Oh, lame. Okay, I got it. Click. Some sporting event or action show. Good news is, overall, Walz did better than Vance. He did better talking about actual policy, of course, because Democrats have actual policy and Republicans just have a series of strategies for thieving from you. But he also did better at communicating to the folks that simply don't pay attention to any of this. That's who this is for, this whole event. And he recapped. What he had to do is recap what's wrong with Republicans and what's good about Democrats. He didn't do a lot of what's good about Democrats, frankly. And guess what? There's a reason that's harder for him. There's a reason. When people say, oh, you're both the same, we know they're wrong. But not entirely. Because it's hard for him to say what's good about Democrats, because the Democrats, by and large, aren't good. They are a conservative party. They are simply the less conservative party. But he could say there was some good things. And he did. And more importantly, Trump will be disastrously bad for the country. Trump is a traitor. He tried a coup. J.D. Vance is participating in a current coup attempt. They are currently trying to make it seem that we already know how Trump is planning on attempting to steal this election. Trump is planning on pretending as though there was a bunch of illegal immigrants bussed in by the Democrats, and that's the reason there were so many more votes. That's the reason a record-setting amount of votes came out for the Democrats. It's got nothing to do with the fact that he tried a coup 4 years ago, and he hasn't been thrown in prison yet, or up against a wall, or wherever you put people that try coups. Foul joke to be made at a later date, probably in private. Anyway, that's the plan, and J.D. Vance is participating in it. Tim Walz did a good job of demonstrating that in easy, quick, simple terms to the American people. This guy's a traitor. Do not trust him. Good. Also, these people's only goals are to help the rich people. Hey, you with the family leave, you want that? Yeah. This guy doesn't want you to have it. I want you to have it. So you can raise your kids. Oh, hey, is there a few grays in your head of hair? In your mighty mane? Well, you're less likely to get health care. Excellent job. How many people did it affect? We'll find out in about a week. I thought he did a good job. The main thing he had to not do was F up the way things have been going, because momentum is in Harris's favor. Trump and Vance keep saying despicable things. There is I don't know what the correct word is. David Feldman does, but there's a high watermark for how many people will vote for Trump. And they're there. And they lose people when they stop being evil. So they have to keep being evil and hope that we just get so used to them being evil that we don't think it's something that needs to be battled against. And we get lazy and we don't go to the polls. They're also hoping that Russian propaganda works. Russian propaganda exists to make us vote against our own best interests. And it does not only exist for right-wingers. Yes, Tenet Media and its ilk exists to get right-wingers to vote against their own best interests by voting for right-wingers. It also targets left-wingers. A lot of the stuff you're seeing saying that, oh, well, I'm going to stay home and not vote for Kamala because this, that, or the other thing that I genuinely believe in. Like, for example, Palestine. I genuinely believe Palestinians are human beings, and so I must not vote for Kamala Harris. It's also, generally speaking, Russian propaganda. Why? Because they want you to vote against your own best interests. They'll find reasons that align with your beliefs to get you to vote against your interests. But the point is that you vote against your interests or you fail to vote. That's the world we currently live in. Back to Whitmer before we end. It probably is worthy of a whole show. And it is super depressing that Dana Nessel has gone full dark side. But how the last thing that was asked by Pinkerbelt was, how do we get the rest of the folks to do the Whitmer journey? I don't think we need to exactly mimic what happened to Gretchen Whitmer. She's a politically savvy person who was paying attention at a unique time in U.S. politics and specifically Michigan politics. But the broad strokes of this broad's path we can follow. Basically, she just saw that it was politically advantageous. That's the through line. She saw that pot could be put on the ballot. It was going to be put on the ballot. She said, well, if the hippies are coming out to vote for this, I bet they'll vote to also gerrymander. There we go. Ungerrymander the state. She was correct. She pitched herself as being a practical lefty, and that was something that worked. Basically, the idea is this: you just show them. Whatever district we're talking about, you show them that the left has enough of a presence there to get things done, to get a person put into office again. A lot of the bribes these people take, they're bribes so they can buy TV ads, so they can convince people that don't know anything about anything to check the box next to their name. We can say those bribes are unnecessary because look, 500 of us from your state have emailed you. That's going to change minds. That's going to change votes. That's going to turn people into the people we want them to be. And here's the really interesting thing. Once people vote for these things, they have to pretend like they have principles. We know they don't. We know these are basically soulless husks in office right now. But they have to pretend like they voted for it because they had a feeling about a thing or they have morals or whatever. Get somebody like who's someone from my state that would be a good. Get Alyssa Slotkin or Gary Peters to vote for lefty things a couple of times, and they're going to have to vote for a lefty thing without being pushed just so they don't look like flip-floppers. Momentum is a huge thing in U.S. politics. That is the next step. There's almost no point in even, frankly, sticking around on planet Earth if we don't keep Trump out of the White House. We literally cannot put off the U.S. getting serious about global warming for another 4 years. We will not have the ability to change the president until Trump kicks it, if he gets in this time. Register to vote. Vote now if you can. Vote early if you can. Just do it in case a bus should hit you. Do a gift for the rest of us. Get everyone you know to vote right now for Kamala Harris. It's got to happen. Incidentally, heads up before we leave for the day. Speed Debate's going to upgrade. And while my community's here, I just want to tell you, I'm going to be trying to talk to some Trump voters and get them to not vote. Just get them to not vote. That's going to be one of the groups I try to talk to. Hopefully y'all can help me with that. Certainly, as you watch, make a note of what's effective and what's not. We've had a shocking amount of progress with this so far. Going to be talking to libertarians and trying to get them to vote for Harris. I think there's a strong potential that we can get libertarians to vote for Harris. I'm going to get as many groups of these dingbats who vote against their own interests quickly, hence the speed part of Speed Debate, quickly to stop doing that. I'd also want to talk to lefties who are planning to not vote because I think they're victims of Russian propaganda. I think they have the best of intentions and the worst of ideas. I want to talk to them as well. Gang, Dominico, October 6th, early voting, California opens. Make a note of it. Agreed, Latino Mufune. All right, y'all. That was fun. I enjoyed that. Thank you for hanging out with me today. This has been WYCD Wicked. That stands for What You Can Do. My name is Jake, and this right, y'all, is a gentleman by the, this is the overlays. That's not what I mean. Is a gentleman by the name of Donald James X.